Hello and welcome to Spread Book Joy. Today I'm delighted to talk to you with a little help from some friends about why adults read children's books. If you're new to the channel, I'm Jack, and if you're not new, welcome back to Spread Book Joy. If you are new though, you may not know that I am a primary school teacher who loves to share great children's books for home or school on this channel, which was primarily the reason I started this channel. But I also talk about my own reading. So it's quite a broad thing, a lot of broad things I talk about on this channel. But being that we are currently in March, and in March there is an amazing readathon, and I'll link all the hosts' videos in the description box. Called Middle Grade March, celebrating children's literature that is marketed as middle grade, and it's for adults, a readathon for adults to enjoy, read and celebrate reading children's fiction, good quality children's literature as far as I'm concerned. One of the things I've wanted to talk about since I started this channel, I wanted to do a video on why adults read children's literature and particularly middle grade fiction. It's become a real popular thing in the last few years. Plenty of YouTube channels promote children's literature, not as I promote it for people looking for books for children, but I know that a lot of people watch my channel and want it for themselves. They want to read middle grade for themselves, and I myself read middle grade for professional purposes, but also I've come to really enjoy and appreciate good literature that you find in this category. I put a call out, and lo and behold, the lovely community that is BookTube, some of my favourite lovely BookTube friends have sent me clips talking about why they read middle grade fiction, and I've also had some comments from people who watch my channel, and I'm going to include all of the comments. So I sat down yesterday and I thought about putting this video together, and I've wanted to get my own thoughts. I watched one video in the week when it was sent to me, and I thought, no, I don't want to be influenced by everyone else's videos just yet. I want to see what my thoughts are on why I read children's literature and beyond for professional reasons, and what I enjoy about it, and to see if my ideas and theirs mesh. Now, as you can expect, and you can probably predict some of them, there is a lot of common ground as to why adults read children's literature. I also thought about a really fantastic essay I read 2 years ago by the children's author and scholar Katherine Rundell. So she's an Oxford scholar. She teaches Shakespeare at Oxford and writes children's fiction. So she wrote an essay and published it about 2 years ago. It's called Why You Should Read Children's Books Even Though You Are So Old and Wise. And I'd highly recommend listening to it on Audible or just downloading and reading it. I think it's something like a 50-page essay. It takes about an hour to listen to on Audible. I think about an hour anyway, but it's wonderful, and she puts things so eloquently, because she is a writer and a scholar, that I would like to sort of bring into the conversation. So I'm going to bring in a number of sources. One is Katherine Rundell's marvellous essay. The other is an essay, well, it's a talk given by Neil Gaiman. It's in his collected non-fiction, which is called The View from the Cheap Seats. Brilliant book. Neil Gaiman writes for all age groups, so he's written picture books, middle grade, books that are considered YA, adult fiction, horror. He's so prolific, and he's written, graphic novels, and all this non-fiction. And he's often asked to speak at conferences. So there's an essay, and I just want to get this right. The essay that I'm going to be quoting from is called What the Very Bad Swear Word Is a Children's Book Anyway. And it was a lecture that he gave a number of years ago, all around what is a children's book, because he has trouble defining what that is, and he's tried to. So the other book I'm going to be looking at is this wonderful short book. If you're ever interested in writing for children, I'd recommend this. And it's the marvellous Joan Aiken, who has written some of my favourite children's books and short stories. The Wolves of Willoughby Chase is her most famous book, and I love the short story collection A Necklace of Raindrops to read to children. It's absolutely lovely. And she's written a book, The Way to Write for Children, and so I'm going to be quoting a bit from her. The other thing I'm going to be quoting from is an article where I discovered a book that I'm definitely going to try and buy and read, and the article is all based on the book called Literature's Children, The Critical Child and the Art of Idealisation, and it's a book by a Dr. Louise Joy, who's a Cambridge academic. So those are the sources I'm going to be quoting. I'm going to link everything in the description box below. So the structure of this video is going to be that I'm going to talk a bit about my reasons for reading middle grade. I'm going to show clips and talk about comments from viewers about why they read middle grade, and for each one there's a lot of overlap, as you can imagine. I'm trying to theme their clip a little bit, so I've taken a particular point from their clip and I'm going to expand on it with quotes from sources plus my own views, and hopefully it's all going to work, and hopefully it will be done in one part. If not, it might be a two-part video, but fingers crossed. But I do talk a lot and I've got a lot to talk about. So the first thing I want to talk about is what makes a book a children's book, and this is something that is really debated, and there are lots and lots of definitions, academic definitions. Now, this is not a full sort of academic discussion around what makes a children's book, and I don't think this video is about that, but I thought it was useful to define what we mean by children's literature a little bit, and what middle grade is. Now, I've already talked about the fact that middle grade is a marketing category, and it's there so that publishers know who to market children's books at, and that parents and booksellers and people can just point to a rough area to say, oh, if you're this age, that's where you should be looking. But actually, it is all it is. It's a marketing category. Children's literature, there are plenty of definitions and about children's fiction and children's literature. So I'm just going to read a couple of them and just talk a little bit about them. But there are tons out there. There's a lot of academic work on it. So I'm just going to do a little bit here because I thought they were interesting quotes from Katherine Rundell. She said, "The writing we call children's fiction is not a childish thing. Children's fiction has childhood at its heart, which is not the same thing as being, and she means as being childish. Children's fiction is not written by children, it stands alongside children, but is not of them." So that's a really interesting distinction, isn't it? So children's fiction is not childish, she's saying, and it's not a childish thing. It is not written by children. And she makes a distinction in her book. She says childish things include, you know, throwing tantrums and things like that. But children's literature and children's writing for children and children's fiction is not what she would consider childish. And Neil Gaiman, he tries to define it, and he openly talks about the fact that he finds it really difficult to define what children's books are. "I've been a professional writer, earning my living through my words for 30 years now. I have written books for adults, I have written books for children. I have written several books for adults that were awarded the Alex Award by YALSA, the Young Adult Library Services Association, for being books for adults that younger readers enjoyed. I have written books for children that were later republished in respectable editions which adults could buy and read in public without fear of being thought childish. I have won awards for writing for adults and awards for writing for children. I published my first book for children the day I swapped my dad for 2 goldfish almost 15 years ago now. So it is embarrassing to admit that, as I write this, as I read it, and for most of the last 5 months, I have been trying to work out what a children's book is and what an adult book is, and which one I was writing and why." I think that in general, the key question of what is children's fiction is answered in the same way as on the "I know it when I see it" principle, and that is true up to a point. But Coraline was only published as a children's book because Morgan Di Fiore lied. So Morgan Di Fiore is the daughter of his literary agent at the time. So when Neil Gaiman wrote Coraline, which is now marketed as a middle grade book, he wrote it and he sent it to his literary agent, and he said, "I think this is a children's book." And she said, no, it's not a children's book. It's far too scary for a children's book. So then he suggested she read it to her daughter and see. So she read the first chapter to her daughter, and the daughter absolutely loved it. Not just her daughter, but another child. And this was Morgan Di Fiore, who he's talking about, who says that's the reason Coraline got published, because she lied. And the lie was that she wasn't frightened. They were excited to find out what happened next. So they told their mum, no, it wasn't scary. They wanted to know what happened next. And years later, once it had been published and marketed as a children's book, he sat in the theatre watching the first stage production of Coraline, and this now 15-year-old girl was sitting next to him, and he said, you know, it was because of you, it got published as a children's book because your mum thought it would be too scary, so we read it to you and you weren't scared. And she said, oh, I was terrified, but I wanted to know what happened. I was so eager to find out what happened, so I lied. And I said I wasn't scared. And Coraline is a very creepy book. In fact, I've read it with children year on year on year. I've got a video on Coraline for teachers because I used to teach with it. I still do teach with it. And it is a book that thrills and frightens children, but they love it, and children get a great thrill from being scared, don't they? But I thought it was a really interesting point to illustrate that it's only marketing a lot of the time that ends up making children's books into middle grade. It's a marketing thing. So I thought that was just a really interesting point to start with. So I'm going to play the first clip now. This is from the marvellous Shelley Swearingen, and I'm going to link all the names of the people who've contributed in the description box below, and you should definitely go and check out their channels. They're all marvellous people. I watch them all very, very regularly, and they all have great middle grade recommendations, but Shelley Swearingen is my first video. So over to Shelley.
So Jack recently asked me, why do you read middle grade novels? And I was like, I'll answer that for you. That's going to be easy. It hasn't been easy coming up with an answer. So the word that I keep coming up with, the word that is conjuring in my mind is the word comforting. And I thought I would try and unpack that with you here on camera. So when I think of the word comforting, I think about coming back to center. Sometimes as an adult, all of those things that make us busy and make our lives chaotic and kind of wild, sometimes with a middle grade novel, I think that I'm getting back to the basics and the things that really matter in life, like how to be a good friend. I think of E.B. White's Charlotte's Web with that, or to always be kind, regardless, to always be kind regardless. And with that, Wonder by R.J. Palacio has that message. I also think about the playfulness that I get from a middle grade novel, and I also find that really comforting. So the playfulness and silliness of something like Matilda by Roald Dahl, which is about a mischievous and magical little girl trying to adjust in her new school, which is not great, by the way. I also think of like that silliness when it comes to the banter of a brother and a sister, and I think of that as like the mixed up files from Mrs. Basil E. Frankenwheeler by E.L. Coningsburg. And this novel in particular, there is something really playful about the mystery that unravels as this brother and sister have run away from home. And there is something quite charming and then also comforting in that you know that you're gonna be in a really kind of fun and playful mystery, but you also know that they're not gonna cross any weird lines. The murder isn't gonna go into detail about the gruesomeness. And there's something about that is really, really comforting. And also like going on an adventure for the pure sake of adventure, like The Tale of Despereaux by Kate DiCamillo. So I read middle grade for a lot of different reasons, maybe to remind me of a good message, of course to experience a good story and wonderful characters. But at the end of the day, I find middle grade novels incredibly comforting. And that's, I think, the main reason why I keep going back to them again and again. Yeah.
So the theme of comfort comes across there from Shelley's video. She talks about a lot of things, but I'm just going to pull that one out from Shelley's video. And comfort is something that many, many adults spoke about in their responses to this question, why do you read middle grade fiction? And actually, talking about the comfort and the things that we take from it as adults, and that returning to centre and the idea of being reminded of things, that key messages like kindness and things, and being reminded of those good things in life. Katherine Rundell had something to say about that. Children's fiction is not exclusively for children. When I write for two people, myself aged 12 and myself of now, and the book has to satisfy two distinct and connected appetites. My 12-year-old self wanted autonomy, peril, justice, food, and above all, a kind of density of atmosphere into which I could step and be engulfed. My adult self wants all of those things, and also acknowledgements of fear, love, failure, of the rat that lives within the human heart. Those who write for children are trying to arm them for the life ahead with everything we can find that is true. And that links back to what Shelley was saying. And she goes on to say, and perhaps also secretly to arm adults against those necessary compromises and necessary heartbreaks that life involves. To remind them that there are and always will be great sustaining truths to which we can return. And so many times in our lives, despite what we tell ourselves, adults are powerless too. We as adults must hasten to children's books to be reminded of what we have left to us whenever we need to start out all over again. Now, these quotes from Katherine Rundell are absolutely perfect, and they really go with what people were telling me. And my own thoughts on it, the nostalgia of children's books and what she's talking about, that returning to and reminding ourselves of those truths and that nostalgia and those memories and that immersive quality of children's books. So when she talks about the density of atmosphere into which you can step and be engulfed, and it just reminded me, one of my reasons for reading children's books is that comfort. So when I reread my old childhood favourites, which is something I do fairly regularly, I kind of remind myself of that 100% immersive feeling I had when I was younger. Life was less complicated, or a different kind of complicated when you're a child, and going back to that and recentering ourselves, as Shelley said, can be a really valuable experience. So I'm going to go on to my next clip, and the next clip is from Alice over at Alice and the Giant Bookshelf, and she's going to expand on that nostalgia theme, which I think is really vital to this conversation, because a lot of adults will reread childhood favourites for that nostalgia, just as Shelley was talking about, and now Alice will join the conversation.
Hi Jack, you asked me why do I read middle grade fiction? There are at least 3 reasons. The first one being nostalgia. So I absolutely love the nostalgia factor with children's books. I love returning to old beloved books from childhood and reading them again. The ones that I have on my shelves that I haven't yet revisited, I have them on my shelves in the hopes of one day revisiting them, and sometimes just even looking at them on my shelves reminds me about them, takes me back to a time in childhood. And I love it best when I reread these books and discover that they have a whole new layer that I didn't know about as an adult. So that's reason number 1. And reason number 2 is slightly linked to this, and it's trying other people's favourite children's books for the first time. I love reading books about books. When I read books like this, I not only enjoy the books themselves, I really enjoy finding out about other people's favourite books from childhood. And if they're not the same as my favourite books from childhood, I like to read those books and find out what I've missed out on. So that's another reason why I read children's books. I also did a lot of reading of children's books through my job as a teacher, and I think that reading to children is just one of the most rewarding aspects of life as a teacher, passing on that love of books. The other reason why I love reading children's books is pure enjoyment. I just think that authors of children's books, just the same as authors of adult books, are so clever and are putting together these wonderful plots for us that people can enjoy with their children, but also if you don't have children, you can still enjoy them yourself. Having read a middle grade book in the past week for middle grade March, I was just reminded again why I read these books. For the excitement and the enjoyment, I think that so much is put into these books. I find them really fast-paced in general, because to keep a child entertained, you have to be a bit more pacey than maybe you would be in an adult book. I find them really refreshing in that way, and I just think there's a lot to love there. And I think why shouldn't we read whatever we feel like? And sometimes I feel like, something that just grabs me and doesn't let go until the final pages. And it's the way I feel about mystery books as well. But I think it's done really, really well in a lot of children's books. I enjoy this sense of adventure, and I think that there is something for everybody out there in the world of middle grade fiction. That's all from me. Bye for now, and I'm looking forward to hearing why other people enjoy middle grade as well.
So what Alice is talking about there, that sense of nostalgia and recalling our own childhood, it was also mentioned by another one of my amazing frequent commenters on this channel, and that is Suze. Hi Suze. Thank you for leaving a comment on my post the other day, and she made a very interesting point. And she said, sometimes it is nice to just shut the door, close the blinds, grab a good kids book or watch cartoons like the Flintstones or Scooby-Doo or the Peanuts, and allow yourself a few hours of remembering the pure joy that was and is childhood. It still amazes me that we spend 18 years wanting to get out and be adults, and then spend the rest of our lives in some way or form wanting to go back to the simplistic life of childhood. No bills, no work, no laundry, etc., etc. Especially for those of us who were blessed to be raised in loving, caring homes. And again, this was a key takeaway from a lot of people's reasons for reading middle grade, that getting away from adulting. So getting away from adulting, all those things that sort of make life, just overwhelm us as adults, just the day-to-day of life, but also the big things, the things that are going on in the world right now, and just overwhelm us emotionally. And for me, I love when things got a bit much for me. I have always returned to childhood favourites, Enid Blyton's Mallory Towers, Famous Five, the Narnia books, and it gives me that feeling of comfort that Shelley was talking about, and safety and nostalgia, and kind of centres me again. Alice also talks a bit there about the fact that as an adult rereading her favourite children's books, she discovers things anew that she didn't notice as a child, and that's because we're reading with an adult perspective. And that is the next part of what makes children's books quite surprising that Katherine Rundell talks about. She talks about the surprising politics of children's books, and in that she mentions the following: so that there is a surprising amount of politics to children's fiction, often slyly subversive. Mary Poppins, for instance, is a precursor to the hippie creed, anti-corporate, pro-play. Mr. Banks, the name is significant, sits at a large desk and made money. All day long he worked, cutting out pennies and shillings, and he brought them home with him in his little black bag. Edith Nesbit was a Marxist socialist who named her son Fabian after the Fabian Society, and she goes on to quote Ursula Le Guin. It was Ursula Le Guin, one of the greatest American children's writers, who said this: "We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable, but then so did the divine right of kings, and any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. Resistance and change often begin in art, very often in our art, the art of words. Children's books in the house can be a dangerous thing in hiding, a sword concealed in an umbrella." Isn't that an amazing quote? So the idea that the power of children's books and the sort of subversive politics at play in children's books are quite often missed by children. The key messages are taken by the children, but picked up much more by adults when you reread them, or sometimes we're looking at them with a particular lens, aren't we? So we bring our own fresh, sort of not fresh, but our own older, more experienced lenses to these readings and interpret them in different ways. And she also talks about the audience for children's books being children who are powerless. So she says that children's books are specifically written to be read by a section of society without political or economic power, people who have no money, no vote, no control over capital or labour or the institutions of state, who navigate the world in their knowledge of their vulnerability, and by the same measure, by people who are not yet preoccupied by the obligations of labour, not yet skilled in forcing their own prejudices onto other people and chewing at their own hearts. Which I thought was a really great line. Neil Gaiman also at one point in his book says that children are a powerless minority. Children are a relatively powerless minority, and like all oppressed people, they know more about their oppressors than their oppressors know about them. Information is currency, and information that will allow you to decode the language, motivations and behaviour of the occupying forces on whom you are uniquely dependent for food, for warmth, for happiness, is the most valuable information of all. Children are extremely interested in adult behaviour. They want to know about us. And then he goes on to say, talks about the fact that, Katherine Rundell talks about how we as adults can see these political subversive messages within children's literature. But then Gaiman says conversely, what a child takes from a book is never what an adult takes from it. Ideas that are hackneyed and dull for adults are fresh and new and world-changing for children. And besides, you bring yourself to a book, and children are capable of imbuing words with magic that not even the author knew was there. In the interest of this not being too long a video, I'm going to split it into 2 parts, and I think this is a perfect moment to do just that. So if you have not been here before and you liked what you've seen so far, if you have any comments or any predictions as to what else might come up for why adults read middle grade or children's fiction, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. I'm going to put part 2 up at the same time as I put up part 1, so you can flip straight over to part 2 and watch that as well. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you over on part 2. Bye!